When you dress vintage, regardless of what decade you do, you often can actually incorporate a lot of modern pieces into your vintage wardrobe if you know what you're doing. I dress 1980s, and the pieces I wear with my 1980s looks aren't strictly from the 80s. This is actually a modern sweater I'm wearing. I thrifted it. I'm not exactly sure how modern, but my guess is 2000s to now. I'm going to show you how I can style this relatively modern sweater in a 1980s way and why I think it works for the 80s. When you're trying to slip a modern piece into your vintage looks, it can help to mix it with some true vintage pieces or reproduction pieces if reproductions exist for that decade. For the 1980s, there really is no demand for 80s reproduction pieces. They're still pretty easy to find secondhand, and 80s revival is pretty niche. This is a pair of acid wash jeans from the 80s. We're going to pair it with this sweater so it feels more authentic. The other thing I wanted to point out about this pair of jeans is they're just aggressively 80s. Having like such a statement piece from your desired decade can help tie in more modern pieces. The waistline, the pleats, the pegged leg, the suspenders. It's just so aggressively 80s that it helps the sweater look more 80s. The reason why I think this sweater works in a 1980s look is because it's a pretty classic, timeless cut, and pastels were actually a really big trend in the 80s. Another way you can help your garments look more accurate to the time period is the correct undergarments. I like to add shoulder pads to a lot of my 80s looks. It helps get that like inverted triangle silhouette that we associate so heavily with the 80s. You got mad at me last time I did a look like this, but I did notice a lot of people tuck their pants into their socks in the 80s, so that's what I'm doing. Little details like that can really help sell the time period. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Hair, makeup, personal grooming choices like the shape of your eyebrows can do a lot to sell a period look. So take that into consideration. And we are done. This is our 80s look using a modern sweater as our main piece. We mixed it with real 80s pieces to make it feel more authentic. I hope you'll consider this when you're building your vintage wardrobe.